A pleasant day to everyone. Welcome to the panel session by the UP Press authors on LGBTQ literature. We're just calling this a conversation, Queer Voices in Contemporary Philippine Literature. And we're featuring authors from titles of the UP Press that came out within the year that are queer or queer related. I'd like to introduce our speakers one by one, according to the panel, the gallery as I see it. First is Charlie Samuya Veric, and he's the author of the book, Love of a Certain Age, Poetry in English. Next is Carlomar Daoana, who is the author of the collection, The Elegant Ghost, Poems in English as well. And then we have Jhoanna Cruz, who is the author of a memoir called titled Abinako, and she will describe, all of them will actually talk about their books, no? So it's you will get to know the books better. And then we have three featured poets from the anthology Busila, new LGBTQ poetry from the Philippines. They are Steno Padilla, who is a poet in Filipino, Naro, Mariel Alonzo, who is a poet in English, but actually comes from the South, and we're going to ask her about whether she writes in Binisaya as well. And then we have Macky Torrechilla, who is a poet from Antique, and she writes in Kinaraya. All right, so we begin this session by asking all our featured guests about how they are. Given the fact that we are now almost nearing the end of the year, and the pandemic, the lockdown started in March, so we're talking about 10 months now being in various stages of quarantine, and we'd like to find out how they all are. And then immediately after that, they will also talk about their latest title with us, the book that we're trying to promote, as part of the MIBF online book fair this year. So we begin with the name, according to the names I called, lang muna, no? So each one gets a turn. Charlie.
Hello. Thank you, Neil, for inviting us to this particular session. So the question, how have we been? I think in my case, I've been okay so far. It's been, like 7 months, like you said. Earlier when I was preparing
7 months na, di ba? Kasi March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November. 9 months na, Charlie. 10 months na.
So, you count it. In any case,
and you look, may I say, you look positively glowing. So we all are, aren't we? This is a conversation, so let's just kind of, be relaxed and chill.
Nice. When by the way, when I for this particular session, I remembered that we actually launched the book like last year, around this time in November. And it's been a blur. So it's been like a stolen year and all this time what I've been doing is to do some small writings, like mini essays, but no poetry for me. So far I'm okay, and I've been teaching since July.
Online, sa Ateneo, no? You're also on online mode, like we are in UP.
Yeah.
Okay. And your book with us, how do you think it is it an interesting book to read during the pandemic, you think, or will it just get the person reading it depressed? The book is about Grindr, and Grindr. So if you turn on your Grindr now, but remind ka lang of how life used to be and how much more wonderful it used to be when we realized.
Well, I've never been on Grindr for years now, so I can't really say.
Denial.
And my account.
May screenshot somewhere.
Not Grindr where you are. Meron bang mga people in the vicinity lumalabas?
I don't know. Like, for the most part, like I just stay at home. I also try not to leave the home.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Walang
yeah,
masyado akong kilala nag-grinder in Metro Manila rin kasi nga kahit may makita ka, you really can't do anything. You cannot it's so foolhardy
yeah.
to actually have
True.
face-to-face meeting eh. So,
Nakakatakot.
cybersex marami. They're basically you hook up online and you meet via an app and you have sex online. This is happening. Kaya lang yun ang problema doon, pag ni-record ka, next week meron scandal video, di ba? Ni-record ka. So be careful when you're doing that na walang makikitang identifiable feature. Pag body mo na lang ang makikita mo. Diba? That's not from experience, it's just a bit of advice.
Disclaimer.
Disclaimer, Okay, so Charlie, that's a wonderful bit of news that you actually are getting some writing done. Kahit hindi poetry, at least you're writing.
Yeah, but I'd like to go back to what you're asking, like in particular and its subject, which is what happens on Grindr. I just want to go back to last year in 2019 because when the book launched, that was the same time when the scandal exploded at Ateneo, and it had to do with sexual harassment. When the book was in production, I was actually like thinking, like the timing can be either good or bad, right? Like you don't really want to call attention to yourself when everyone feels puritanical about sex or pleasure for that matter. And I thought to myself that the book coming at that time was really necessary to counter the conservatism, which was the response to the scandal that was happening on campus. In other words, what I wanted the book to do was to show my book is about the relationship between a man of a certain age, a boy half his age. To be translated, if that were to be translated, it's between a daddy and a twink, and it's that takes place online on Grindr in particular. So it's a book of lyric microfictions, and so each sequence is a standalone microfiction, and if you combine all the microfictions together, they constitute a kind of narrative. So that's what the book is all about. And early,
Yeah, I've read it. It's like it's a lyric sequence. That's probably the poetic description for it. We call
yeah,
it microfictions, no, which is another term for it. But yeah, the book actually tells a story. It's almost like a long short story of that relationship between two people who met online, no? And they are not of the same group. What I was saying before the signal became choppy was that the book dignifies that kind of reality of people meeting online, diba? Which, of course, we need to represent that in literature because it is the truth of the lives of so many people now who actually do encounter their potential life partners online. And those relationships are valid and many of them are very successful. So it came out at the time when Ateneo was embroiled in a controversy, and
yeah.
your fears didn't pan out in the end because hindi ka naman you're not involved in that controversy anyway. All right, so we move now. Carlomar, what's your book about? How are you first and your book?
Oh, like the pandemic. Initially, you thought that it would last around like 2 to 3 months and everything would go back to normal. So I was cooking, I was reading, I was like kind of getting into the zone of being productive. And then one a quarantine classification led to another and to another, and it felt like it won't be over. And now, like 8 or 9 months into the pandemic, I mean, the Metro Manila particularly is still in the ECQ zone, or I forgot already. So
Yeah.
yeah, so basically those 3 months of preparation, like mentally, emotionally kind of crashed on the fourth month when when there was no more resolution to this. So I wanted to say that I actually wrote, but I didn't. Like even like a single word, to be honest. It's so difficult. Even reading itself feels like a burden. But sometimes, like because I also teach like Charlie, and we have responsibilities in the world, and um, and that kind of eased me back into some kind of a routine. But like sometimes parang mapapatanga ka na lang, parang what day is it today, or um,
Your,
like
your
the
sleeping
December.
pattern affected by this? Because ako talagang, if I sleep early, I wake up early, I end up feeling that there's more vacuum in the day. But if
Yeah,
I sleep late, and then wake up late, and parang konti na lang yung aking i-make up from how I spent my day.
yeah.
So actually, I've been sleeping later and later, which is crazy.
Mhm. Yeah.
I am
Yeah.
productive
So
at
yeah.
night. I mean, I do get some work done, and I do watch a lot of Netflix. But it's really changed my my biorhythm is very different now. But your book is quite interesting to read during the pandemic, I would say, because it's all about ang daming imaginative journeys ng Elegant Ghost. Meron kang mga poems there, mga travel poems in a way. So it's a way to get out, I think, of your own reality that you're quarantined. Reading your book kind of opens up vistas of other parts of the world, no? When the world was still not in a quarantine state. So that's good
And
for the readers, yeah.
yeah, and the first chapter is actually all about my travels,
Uh,
external and internal, and that kind of frames
there's a
the
journey
entire
motive
book.
in
Yeah.
your there's a journey kind of trajectory in the Elegant Ghost, no? But it's also all about elegant things. uh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Something very zen about it. Because what is beautiful and elegant is also spectral and ghostly and kind of fleeting, di ba? But that's really lovely. So, your book, how can you speak a little more about the book para your readers, potential buyers, might get enticed to buy it?
Mhm. So basically, the way I conceptualize the book, rather than thinking about a specific theme or subject matter, although the chapters are actually delineated according to very broad strokes of themes like desire, travel, and all of that. I would like to see it as some kind of a return to form, because for quite some time I was experimenting. I was kind of thinking the possibility of the line and the stanza. And all of a sudden, it just dawned on me, why not just do the reverse, some kind of, providing order in my chaotic life then. So I started reading very formalist works, meaning to say, paying attention to rhyme and meter, very organized stanzas, in terms of like the number of lines per stanza and all of that. So I also looked into the forms such as sestina and and other forms. So that was a kind of like the organizing principle for all the poems. This
Like
return
Charlie,
to
you gave
form.
yourself in making your book, you gave yourself constraints, no, and procedures to follow. Like Charlie is very procedural, also.
Yeah.
The way the book unfolds. No, yours also has a formal, procedural quality to it. No, yeah. Okay,
So
so
this
now we move.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jhoanna now. Whose book is very different kasi hindi na siya poetry, but Jhoanna also writes poetry. And if you
Yeah.
read it, lyrical ang kanyang prose. Marami may mga lyrical flights si Jhoanna sa kanyang memoir. But she will now describe her situation, how she is, and then talk about her book.
Yeah, well, like everyone, the pandemic did greatly affect my lifestyle, my mental health, and my schedule, because I was scheduled to present my dissertation for final examination in the Vietnam campus of RMIT University.
Yeah.
Yeah, so everything everything changed. And I guess initially the shock of it made me feel like I couldn't do anything. And that kind of uh, sense of helplessness in the situation, and just trying to not catch the virus, trying to stay alive. It seemed like my PhD was the least important thing, that I should be thinking about. But eventually, when that anxiety eased, I had to focus on what I really had to do. And part of the survival of the lockdown was really my sense of commitment to myself, my professional goal as an academic and as a writer. So I had to, at some point, I had to stop making the pandemic an excuse not to be completing my work. And to a certain extent, it was that, because I was in lockdown. I was not a frontliner, so the anxiety was real, but part of it also was imagined, I think. So it was my daily grind with a dissertation that helped me survive it, and eventually I completed and successfully defended, and that's my
You're
biggest
a PhD
accomplishment
holder, yeah.
of the
Wow.
year. That's my
Yeah.
hugest accomplishment of the year. It's like, I'm sorry, 2020 wasn't stolen from me. This is my year.
Uh,
And the book
oh, yeah.
OSL
Oh,
is the like the is the how do you say it? It was like the not the icing on the cake. That's wrong, because the book was really written during the PhD leave. No, the bulk of the book was written during the PhD
And
leave.
are the contents in the book part of the dissertation? Did you include them?
Yes, that's
Yes.
it's part of the creative work,
Okay.
because the PhD is a practice-based
Yeah.
PhD.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
it was both creative and scholarly. So, but by the time the pandemic happened, I had completed the creative work. So it was only the scholarly part that I was finishing and writing. So I didn't do any creative writing during the lockdown, but all the revisions and the actual examination was held in June
And
while we were
the
still in
book's
lockdown.
personal essays, memoir pieces in particular, uh,
Yes,
and
I see
thematically
it as a memoir.
they seem to be about your exile, no, away from your
Mhm.
home ground in Manila to a new
Mhm.
place in the Philippines, no? Especially
Mhm.
very new to you when you moved there for the first
Yeah,
time, Davao, and
yeah.
all the personal vicissitudes that took place, no, in your own life.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so just describe very, very briefly the themes of the book so that your
Yeah.
potential buyer will know.
Yeah, I still call it a memoir because the overarching theme has to do with my first 10 years of rebuilding my life in Davao after my heterosexual marriage ended. And so I moved from Baguio City to Davao City to start over, basically. So if you're interested in that particular theme of starting over, rebuilding your life after the a particular death, let's say, like if, in my case, the death of my marriage, heterosexual marriage, and of course a different life, then that this book should have something for you. Okay,
Yeah.
so how to start over. So that's the overarching theme. But it's if you're looking for a memoir that's like straight narrative or novelistic, this is not it.
Mm.
So because the concept is really standalone essays in which I tried to show my evolution as well as a lesbian writer. So that's something for me that was the creative concern of the book that was uh, covered or that I researched on in my PhD. So in terms of the form of
The
nonfiction,
craft of it, no, that you
yeah,
actually are
yes,
contributing something to not to the form of nonfiction.
yeah, yeah.
Yes. All right, so lovely. We'll get the chance to talk a little more about that. Now we move to the three featured poets from the book Busilak, which I edited. The Busilak book is actually the anthology that came out of the first workshop of the UP Global Grace National LGBTQ Writers Workshop. This took place 2018, and we had 10 fellows, all poets, coming from all over the Philippines. And I invited only 3 of them because we don't have a lot of time. We only have 1 hour slot for the MIBF. But more or less, I chose the in the interest of diversity and also excellence. No, so I have we have Steno, who is a representative of the gay male poet in Filipino. we have to ID that way, and then we have Naro, who is the
representative
representative of the non-binary bisexual poet in English, no, coming from Davao, no? So actually maraming margins si Naro. And Macky would be our representative from Kinaraya, and she now identifies as trans. Actually very fluid identifications for all of them. Steno will be identifying as something else at the end of the So, okay, Steno, can you can the 3 of you take turns lang answering that question? Can we prioritize Macky? Macky seems to be surrounded by family right now.
Yes, sir.
All right. How are you?
at home.
How have you been?
So for the majority of the pandemic time, I had been working. So since I'm the breadwinner of the family, so basically that's a responsibility for me. So if we talk about writing, there's really less creative writing going on with me because I felt like I lost inspiration because if can I talk about it like
if you want to.
Yeah, because way back before the pandemic, we used to like make tambay in the plaza and do all the usual rural gay stuff that we've been doing, and that's where I really get the narrative, which I write in my pieces. But now, since there's a lot of restrictions, we were not able to do that, and because we can't get out of our homes, we're basically restricted to do what we used to do. I kind of parang wala na akong inspiration, or I don't have that much experience to get the narrative to write about stuff. That's why there's less creative writing for me as of the moment, and really more about writing for the office, because I also work as a writer for the information office here in the province. So that's me during the pandemic. Just trying to chill.
Your poems in Busilak, they're actually the 3rd part in a series of Merla Diaries poems, di ba?
Yes, sir.
Right, and they are really drawn. You're right. Macky's material comes from the Agi community that she is a part of in Antique. And so without the social life now, parang wala na masyadong material to draw from, Macky. Pwede
Yes.
mag-invent na lang or mag-imagine. Or pwedeng romantic, because you're still in a relationship right now. Maybe you can write about that.
I don't know. I find the relationship kind of not as interesting as the way things are before.
I know, yeah.
Yeah.
There's not much to say, di ba?
Yes.
As far as
Mas marami-
relationships go,
Mas marami kasing thrill yung, doing it with strangers or doing it in other locations. Unlike now, like you're with the same person, so it's kind of boring.
Galit siya pag binuking mo lahat, kiss and tell masyado.
Yes.
Thank you, Macky. It's lovely. So the poems of Macky are all in Kinaraya, and they are all very brief, short poems, and they're all wonderful, actually, because Macky is able to ground them in the Kinaraya world, but at the same time, the poetic sensibility of Macky is very modern and very elliptical. No, there's so much of the suggested and the evocative. No, and a lot more is left unsaid. No, than said. And Macky is doing a wonderful job for Kinaraya Literature, and of course, bringing to the fore Agi experience, no? Which has not really been represented much, no? In both the local and the national scene. Naro is next. We will hear from her. How have you been, Naro?
I'm doing well or doing okay naman. So I guess in the last months, it's a bit more like similar to Ma'am Jo experience. Like now is really when we confront a lot of existential things about life, purpose, meaning, hope, freedom, freedom from confinement sa bahay, 'di ba? Finding adventure even while staying inside this very familiar place. At the same time, I've been a mental health psychosocial support provider and telecounselor since the eruption of Taal. So continuous siya for COVID as well as for Typhoon Raleigh. So it's been an incredibly an empathic exercise talaga that you can really feel how how we are as people are changing and are confronting this very extraordinary circumstance that we find ourselves in. And I guess yung napupunta talaga sa isipan ko ngayon is it's really queer time. It's such a queer time that I start to feel the non-linearity of things na parang instead of just going through one direction with our constant routines in life na gusto ko lang pumasa, gusto kong makatapos sa pag-aaral. And then ngayon, suddenly, we get to look at things in different perspectives. And from the people that I get to talk to as well, with psychosocial support service, you can really parang you can, I was a witness to that on how things have become, on how time has become so queer for them as well, that they start to see things in a different light. And even, for example, with Macky, with queer relationships, for me, the queer relationship was happening with my friends and with my family on how can we go beyond what is the conventional and how can we go beyond what is the normal or what is the and the commonality that we have been doing every single day. So, nung nawala talaga yung struktura para sa akin, parang biglang nagkaroon ng disorientation. But what I'm quite really proud about, and I've also seen this with a lot of the people that I get to talk to, who I am fortunate enough to talk to, is that from that disorientation, parang nakahanap ka ng new way of growing. Like kahit ito yung mga nangyayari ngayon with issues on governance, with issues of climate change, issues of health, and everything that's happening in our lives, like we are still able to find ways of meaning, and being able then to confront, I guess, the darknesses that we have and not lowering our value. So I guess isa yun sa mga kadalasan talaga na naririnig ko sa mga tao na they feel that they are becoming different people, or perhaps that they are actually realizing aspects of themselves that they have never known before. So I guess yun yung sa akin pinaka moving, I guess, in the last months.
That's so lovely, Naro, no? The pandemic has queered reality, no? It has queered our lives.
Yes.
Because it has thrown a curveball, and suddenly the structure that we used to depend on and take for granted has been taken away. And now we have to evolve new structures. But one structure that has suddenly made itself manifest is really the online mode. Diba? It's a structure that everyone is participating in. I don't know if it's happening with your work in psychosocial therapy, but at least for education, for all of us, that's become a structure that now we all have to confront and to grapple with. And I'm finding opportunities to grow because I realize that education can really happen online. Maybe I'm just speaking for my graduate students. No, I have one class only this sem, 7 students lang, MA-CW. I have never seen my CW MA class become more productive. They are so productive. And the quality of the discussion is always top of the line. The students are all very focused. And of course, there are little things that need to be sort of confronted. Like one of them is queer, but is not out to family. And so when we workshop his manuscript, and it's a queer manuscript, of course, he's using headphones or earphones, so we can talk all we want. But when it's time for him to reply, he has to type it out because maririnig ng mommy beside him. Pwedeng malaman ng mommy that he just submitted a manuscript about giving blowjobs to strangers, di ba? So, kailangan tina-type lang niya. It's really kind of weird. These new realities and these new coping mechanisms, right? But Naro, your poems in Busilak, they're all about suffering na eh. So, because you have been interested in you are in psychosocial work, you are in the helping profession in a way. Your poetry has been all about trying to discuss suffering, no? And not just queer suffering, but suffering because of poverty, because of diasporic labor, because of misogyny and all these different things, no? And yeah, I'm already doing it for you and kind of describing to the reader the poems that you have in Busilak. But you can now speak a bit more about them. Are you far away from those poems now, Naro? What do you feel?
Actually, one of the things that I did first when boredom really set in because of the pandemic was to reread everything I wrote, including the fan fictions that I was writing in high school. Yung mga Harry Potter fan fiction pa. As well as letters that I've sent to my family. And then I realized how much I've really changed in that way to the point of discomfort. So the poems, actually, when I reread them during the pandemic, they held a very different light because they reminded me of who I was prior. And it told me of what I was focusing on. So it was at that time wherein I was really confronting the world first before confronting myself.
I think if I look back, so, political poems sila, Naro, no? Political, because you were there's an anger and there's critique. But now you're more interested in moving on and helping out, no? Talaga maybe the critique is time for the critique. The time for critique is finished, and it's now time to help, no?
Yes. Actually, that's actually very one of the questions that I was asking especially during the workshop that we've had, and even now during the pandemic. It's a similar. I've heard the same sentiment from other poets who also write about suffering and who write about pain. They're asking, like, is now the time? Like, I think now is not the time to write about suffering. Maybe now is a time to write about hope. But for some poets, it might be like it's too different from what we're used to. And for me, I guess it's really the poems, though they are critiques. I guess they really represent myself, my psychic landscape at that time, wherein I was very, I think it was a time wherein I couldn't confront my own identity, or I couldn't confront my own personal suffering, that it became a lot more convenient and perhaps easier to talk about the suffering outside of me and how perhaps I can connect to that. So the difference perhaps with the poems that I'm writing now during the pandemic, wherein I allowed myself the fortune, I guess, like to allow myself that opportunity to confront my own darknesses, is now I'm turning more towards the internal. Like, I'm trying to look into myself. What is my suffering? What is my suffering telling me? Because suffering doesn't have to be negative sometimes. It can be viewed in a different way. And for me, I guess that was the part that I realized, that in all of my poems that I've written, very, very few of them really talked about myself or my own experiences.
That's why, diba, when I wrote the introduction, but you're not unique, Naro, no? The poets now, the young queer poets, seem to be working with a post-confessional mode. meaning it's no longer as solipsistic as before, and people can talk about suffering, for example, in vicarious ways and identifying across different lives, no, in order to locate suffering in all of them, no, as a point of sympathy and a contact zone. Okay. But now we move to Steno because we're running out of time. We're just answering questions one at a time. Steno, yours na. Hi.
Yeah, hi sir, hi everyone. I consider myself very lucky kasi the pandemic, the community quarantine has made me more productive in terms of writing, in terms of reading. I have more time to read books, I have more time to write. Actually, I just finished my second novel last month, and I've done several short stories and poetry as well. So that was one of my major concerns na during the early days of the lockdown, nawala yung yung life ko sa Manila, sa Makati, nightlife. Yeah, and then suddenly I'm just at home in the province and with nothing to do. I've tried turning my Grindr on, pero ang lalayo, kilometers ang layo ng mga tao. So, and it's also nakakatakot din to meet other people.
Talagang nabawasan ng landi tayong lahat, no?
True.
Tayong maging mga mongha. Pero lumalabas din, no, na may inner mongha ka naman from the very beginning.
Ay,
Kasi
true.
ayan, talagang naging productive si mongha, di ba? Talagang nagsulat.
Pero ang na-notice ko, sir, yung sa poetry ko especially, hindi ko ma-replicate yung mga sinulat ko dun sa nasa Busilak, yung mga na kasama dun sa workshop.
Kasi napaka-realistic ng mga tula na yun.
Yes, and it's
na-disabuse ka na.
True, and it's from the experience with my past relationships. And just like Macky, nawala yun. So, walang pinanguhugotang inspiration to write that type of poem.
No, Macky, no, Steno, let's correct that. Macky is presently in a relationship.
I mean,
it's too boring to write about. Ikaw tapos na yung mga yon, kaya ginagawa mo, talaga naisulat mo tuloy lahat.
Yeah. The poems that I've written recently were more political in nature.
Oo nga, nakikita ko siya. Pinupost mo now and then.
Yeah, on Facebook. So yun yung na-notice ko
social
sa...
life naman tayo, no? Because there's social media and there's Zoom. And you see, we have found very creative ways naman, more or less, to keep connected and to cheer each other on, no? So the writing community actually has not been as adversely affected, no, as it could have been because we now are linked in different ways. Now, we're also linked because of our queerness, no? And I think that's the next question we need to answer. Is, do we identify, all of us, unproblematically with queerness, with the queer self-identification? And what would be the challenges to for a queer writer during these times? Can we actually Naro already opened that discussion, and she's actually given her response to that na. But the others now have the opportunity to weigh in, because I think our audience will be very interested in, particularly if they're also queer themselves, no? And only the queer people are the ones with disposable income anyway to buy books. So sila na lang, diretso na lang nating hard sell yung mga libro natin. Is, what are the challenges for a queer writer during these difficult times, no? Globally difficult times, kasi we're not just in suffering as a country isolated, no? The whole world is in the same boat, no? In a manner of speaking. So let's talk about that now. So anyone can just kind of weigh in, whoever wants to. Just say something now. Hindi na tayo methodical na one by one. Who wants to say something? Wala pa rin. Ano ba yun? As I'm thinking that we had this National Queer Studies Conference where I basically gave a keynote that called on Filipinos to queer the queer. Particularly if you're a Filipino scholar or critic or activist working in queer discourse in various ways, no? Is to actually locate what queer is where you are. because the idea of a queer, an unproblematic, easy queer globality is actually an illusion. Wala naman queer globality na everyone around the world can identify with unproblematically. We are all queer where we are. And so there we have our own queer, like our own situation, our own, probably we can talk about it using the words that are actually circulating in our own community, like agi or bantut or bakla or bayot, no? But those can all be queered, no? And we have to sort of articulate that. So I'm thinking that the challenge, I think, for a queer person right now is to actually, for me, understand our own situations first. That's a very big challenge because you're thinking about trying to differentiate yourself against queer globality on one hand, but also differentiate yourself in your own community as a queer individual who's an artist, who's a poet, who's slightly more angsty than the rest, who is probably into S&M, you know, or you have your own you have your own radical whatever edge, no, or margins, no. So that for me is a challenge, you know, trying to sort of realize who you are. So it is a question of actually self-awareness in a way. That's very sort of difficult, no? Given the fact that we're all more or less isolated right now. Okay, so anyone who wants to weigh in? Is that question too abstract?
Neil, for me, personally, is a source of conflict more than confidence. Like when I think about the queer as a category, it makes me a bit conflicted about the category.
Can I ask you, Charlie, were you called Agi in your childhood?
Yeah, I was called Agi when I was
Why
a kid.
can't you call yourself Agi now? Why go for the word queer?
Well, at home we like my brother and I call each other Agi, and it's a term of endearment, and so for strangers they get shocked to refer to each other as
Okay.
because it's one way of normalizing, you know, a term that can be hurting,
Yes, yes.
that can be painful, and so within the scope of the family, the term agi becomes a term of endearment rather than a term of pain. But you know, when I think about queerness or the queer, I think of it as a sensibility rather than as a category. And I say that I think as a poet that when I write my poems, I don't actually try to theorize. Like I don't operate as a critic. I don't operate as a scholar. I become a different person, and I become a different person precisely because of a sensibility. And so for me, queerness I think has to do with difference, and it's the sensibility of being different. And my duty as a poet is to describe what my experience is, and the way I experience it, and maybe the naming and the appreciation and the theorizing will come later on. And for me in particular, that job belongs to the reader. It's the job of the reader or the critic to make sense of the poem and to make sense of it in a particular way. But for me, to be queer is not to name myself as queer, but rather to describe what it is that I think is different about how I relate to the world.
Hmm. So in a manner of speaking, what you're saying is that you are not limited in terms of what you will write about, just because you may identify in a broad sense as a queer writer or as queer. That in fact,
Uh,
and you will write what you want to write, no? And that difference that is implicit in your writing will be part of what that queerness may end up being, especially as a matter of interpretation, no? So I think you are, yeah. No queer writer naman will actually want to be boxed in or ghettoized by that self-identification, right? So being queer is not a matter of topic or theme or or any kind of preoccupation. It is really probably just a subject position, right? And that subject position can actually perorate, ruminate, and describe anything. And talk about anything.
Mhm.
All right. So, yes, go ahead.
Can I take off on
Jhoanna,
that?
yes.
Oh, sorry, Charlie wanted to add
Charlie will
something.
elaborate a little more, and then Jhoanna. God, I do have to curate pala. Okay.
I just want to clarify for those who derive power from calling themselves queer. I totally get that, and I appreciate that, and I support that. But I guard against the politics of naming. I think as a poet in particular, it's important to be open to many things and to go beyond what 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 naming makes possible.
Yeah, but you
Just that.
understand, diba? Like agi is something that you have repurposed in order to make it a term of endearment. Queer was the same. It used to be a pejorative and in a term of abuse that got leveled at queer children in schoolyards in America. So now, of
Yeah.
course, a badge as an insignia of pride, right? And
Yeah.
people are calling themselves queer and don't really mind it. And that's why we're queer, we're here, get used to it, right?
Mhm.
So I think that's the spirit of queer is that, isn't it? I mean, and it's anywhere in the world, any term of abuse can be queered in that sense, can be embraced and can be used as an empowerment, no, rather than as a pejorative. Okay, so Joanna wants to weigh in.
Yeah, because I just wanted to express the oppositeness, I guess, of my stand on queer. But when I started PhD, I think I was, I wanted to really take on my queerness as a learner and how it's articulated in my writing or how it can be embodied, etc. But it was exactly my scholarly interest in queer theory that showed me that I couldn't force myself into queer what queer theory said queer writing should be or should look like. You see, so like Neil said in his keynote during the Philippine Queer Studies Conference, we have to interrogate it. I mean, I do love the ideas behind queer theory, but as a Filipina queer person, I felt I had to interrogate it, my own understanding of it, and that led to the opposite end of the spectrum, in which I embraced my lesbianness. So it's like the naming of lesbian in my identity and my writing was my way of queering my writing practice. So mahalaga sa akin yung naming na yon, and I don't resonate with Tibo either. It depends on what day. But you see, the indeterminacy of the naming of Filipina lesbians for me is something that we can use to maybe empower who we are and really assert our subject position, not just as lesbians, but as Philippine lesbians in particular. So in dissertation, how much time do we have?
But Joy, but I think your message is clear.
2 seconds.
There's some more. But I think we're getting the
In
drift of it, right?
Yeah, I call it pagka-lesbiana. So that's my term for it. So like you said, we need to foreignize our understanding of queer theory. So it's pagka-lesbiana with a hyphen, or lesbian becoming. So as a lesbian and as a lesbian writer, my subject position impinges upon the way I write genre instead of non-fiction, and in what I call interventions. So both interventions, both non-linguistic and linguistic, and that's why you have to buy my book to find out what I mean by pagka-lesbiana.
This is the thing. Like the content of your dissertation, the creative part's already out in up in the
Yeah.
book. Paano yung theory part, which is just as important? I hope you can publish it in a scholarly journal or something.
Yeah, I really hope I'll find a home for the theoretical part of
Yeah,
it.
because
I
contribution.
presented a capsule version in the conference.
Yes, yes, yes. But it's a genuine contribution to
Yeah,
theorizing, no?
yeah.
I think what
I
we
think it. I think
what
it.
we need to say, however, is that queer or even these other words in the LGBTQ alphabet soup, diba? They're
Mm-hmm.
actually they have an activist usage, but they
Yes,
have an academic, scholarly, theoretical
yes,
usage, and they're very different from each other. So I
yeah,
think in the activist sense, I mean, like it's so easy to just say queer and gather everyone together because you're
yeah,
actually an activist, right? But
yeah,
if you have to parse things and distinguish things, that's where you actually make these distinctions that Jhoanna is doing for us. No, it's not as easy as uniform a picture as the word queer might actually uh,
Mhm.
tell us. No, so the others can weigh in now, or we move on to other questions. Other thoughts that you want to share with us regarding this, Macky? Ikaw, yung identifying as an agi or a queer or a trans writer, ano yung
mm.
implications noon for you? At ano yung palagay mong special challenges for you given the situation we are all in right now?
I think in terms of using the word queer as an identity, I think that it's not really introduced yet to our locality. We all know na it's very widespread na to the cities, and where the information of the academe is very much accessible to a lot of students and a lot of people. But then here in the local communities, it's not really discussed. There's still a lot of discussion needed for us for majority of the people to understand what queer means. And I think that if we can introduce that, it would be a possibility for other people to know na it's it's an identity that they can use. If kasi here in our locality, I think that for gays in general, we are boxed into mainly as transgender. I mean, the two terms gay and transgender are are confused as just one thing. But then I myself, I know that these are two different things. But then a lot of people still don't know about that. But so if we can introduce the term queer to other people, maybe they can have the realization na maybe I'm queer, maybe I don't identify myself as just this and this. So I think that here in my locality, there's still a lot of awareness and information that we need to do or we need to share to people so that they can be introduced to the concept of queer as an identity or as an orientation.
Oh. Kasi impression din natin parang widespread na yung queer sa Manila. Hindi naman eh. Sa ano lang yan, sa academe lang yan, tsaka sa mga activists lang na mga naka-network, no? Hindi rin, even in the Tagalog regions of the Philippines, you would say Tagalog is the center. Wala rin yung queer. It's still basically a very weird concept and hardly anyone understands it. Actually, yung gay has been localized na kasi masyadong luma na yung word na gay. Meron ng mga Miss Gay barangay pageants all over the Philippines, really. So gay has really meant gay for us, no? Which of course can be both paminta at pag-girl. Di ba parang yun yung ating ng gay. Queer
Yeah.
is different, no? Queer is actually, you can be straight and queer because you have a foot fetish. You can be a straight man or a straight woman and be queer because you like armpits. Diba? I know so many people who like armpits, particularly bushy and smelly armpits, right? The smellier, the better. It has a term, mascalagnia or something like that, no? A kind of fetish for the armpit, okay? That's queer. That's actually what queer means, diba? It was supposed to be this sort of a word for strangeness, sexual strangeness or gender strangeness in any way. Okay, but all right. So I think just as a way to round off our discussion, kasi lumagpas na tayo sa 1 hour. I-edit ko pa siya. What question would you like to answer? Because I'm interested in talking to in addressing the aspiring queer writer. Yung young bading or tibo or agi or a non-binary or queer writer na may be listening to us or watching this episode. What advice would you like to give that person? Medyo beauty pageant na ito. So put your best foot forward at mag-project na to the judges. What advice can we give the young queer writer in the Philippines now? In the face of this global crisis we're in the face of all the challenges we are in the face of information technology, which is also a kind of information overload, di ba? In the face of all these different categories in terms that are circulating, which can be confusing, right? What advice can we give them?
So as cliche as it may sound, I think the primary impulse or the primary motivation for me to write from a certain subject position was also this generation of writers that wrote about the queer experience, or like they were a big influence on me, and that kind of opened me up, and and thought about the possibility also of articulating my own experiences. Before, perhaps I was seeing those works as a kind of permission for me to write, because I know that it's sometimes hard to kind of start from this subject position. In the olden days, we call it the persona, right? Just so there's this associative quality between the voice and the articulation. But you can say, oh, it's the persona speaking, but actually it's my own experience, and that's although it seems like it's a narrow bridge to cross, I think that was also important to me, that I claimed that space. And yes, like looking into works that kind of paved the way for this kind of expression, sensibility, a way of seeing the world, forages through like the available materials that surround us. I think that could be a good start. I mean, again, as cliche as it may sound, start with Busilak, for instance. I mean, if you are like, like I have a copy of the book, and I was like thinking, because in my generation it was Ladlad, so I'm just happy that they have access to these voices that resonate with them because they are from the same generation.
Yes. Medyo iba na generation natin, Carlomar, no?
Yeah, it's iba.
So Carlomar's advice is so logical, no? Or it's sensible talaga, which is to find your companion spirits, no? Basically read, no? Read widely, read voraciously, read wastefully, and then find the voices that resonate with your own, that can accompany you in your own journey of creativity, no? So that's wonderful advice. And of course, Carlomar is too modest to actually endorse himself. I would endorse Carlomar's books, not just this one, but all his other books. Actually, the books of all these people who are now with us, no? I know Steno has a novel about to come out. Nanalo kasi siya ng isang malaking contest, a novel writing contest. So Steno is also a novelist, no? And Charlie already has other books also. In fact, he has also a scholarly book, yung kanyang dissertation, I think, has already been published by Ateneo Press. So that's also available. So we should endorse all the books of all these guests, no? Not just the UP Press titles. And Joy, of course, has had previous publications, but I think this is the first honest to goodness book, no? Kasi yung dati mo para mga chapbooks or small books.
No, I have a book of fiction, lesbian fiction, published by Anvil, yung Women Loving.
Women
but
loving.
it's out of print. But there's an ebook version called Women on Fire, which is still available. But
Okay.
those are really old stories. That's the kind of writing I used to do in my 20s. So if you're
Mm.
interested in what I'm doing now, you really should get this book. Yeah, I'm a
Ah,
shameless
ito,
hussy.
memoir
So,
ito.
as you can see, I'm a shameless hussy. So
Oo, tsaka memoir ito. In other
I
words, hindi ito made up. This is kiss and tell. Lahat ng mga
yes.
ito factual.
There's Jing asked me before when we were talking about my nonfiction. Jing Hidalgo said that, is there anything at all you keep secret, Joy? And I must say, I do keep a lot of secrets. This book is not a tell-all book, but it's a tell some things. So if you're interested in some of the things that I have kept secret in the past and now reveal, well, they're in the book, but it's not a tell all.
That's something
Secrets I
to
still keep to
say.
myself.
Something to tell our young writer, no? Kasi parang Carlomar's advice is implicitly saying, you know, write from your own life, write from your experience. And now Jhoanna is actually saying there are things you should not write about.
Yeah.
So actually, yeah, no,
Yeah.
maganda yan na malaman din. But
Especially
I
if you don't want to get sued for libel or you don't want your
this is where I think
parents to come back from the dead, things like
Jhoanna,
that.
this is where the strategic choice of genre comes in.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if you choose poetry naman or fiction, you can actually do all these
Yeah.
things, no? And under the
And that's
pretext
why
that they're
before
all
I
made
wrote
up.
fiction.
Mhm.
I was hiding behind the genre of fiction.
Yeah.
But now that I'm older, much older,
You can risk
I
more.
feel I have more courage to, to tell
You can
the
risk
truth
more, no?
about
You
my
can risk
past.
more, yeah.
Yeah.
So young writers nga probably, you get to choose the genre you want to work with or work in.
Yes.
Any
But
other
as
bit
for
of advice?
advice,
Yes.
As for advice for young writers, I will say that the best thing that ever happened to me as a writer is when I decided I was not going to listen to what the old fogies tell us about writing. So, and I
That
think
would
the
be us.
young,
Jhoanna, if you're realizing
Yes.
that would be us, right?
that would be us.
So
Stop
you're
listening
actually
to what old fogies say.
telling the listener to not listen to us, to forget everything. Okay. Which is
That's what I'm
nice. It's
saying.
very self-reflexive.
Yes. Stop asking for permission to write what you need to write. Stop seeking approval from the elderly to write what you need to write.
I would say this, however, no, just as a counterpoint to that naman, is that once you found your companion spirits, no, these are the companion voices, they should be the touchstones, and it's their approval you should seek. Meaning they are not real people you can talk to. They are books.
Mm-hmm.
Diba? They are texts. No? They become your standards. No? You have to have them. You have to have them. You have to have a way to affirm what you're doing. If you cannot get affirmation, and maybe it's not a good idea to get affirmation from actual people surrounding you, although now and then that's useful, get
Or
affirmation.
literary awards.
Yeah, get affirmation from the books you love. They become the touchstones for your writing. Okay? And you know you're doing a good job because you can imagine that this person you admire, this author you admire, would actually not mind reading what you have written. Anyway, so any other bits of advice? Naro, from a psychosocial perspective. Because Naro is a counselor and a therapist, no? Should we write for therapy?
Studying. Nag-aaral pa.
It's a good bit of advice. No? Parang just think about the idea of writing for therapy as well. It's, many of these great writers in America, particularly in the last century, actually became writers out of because of their experience with psychotherapy. Diba, the idea of the talking cure, right? They were asked to keep journals, write things down, and then they realized that writing had its own pleasure and fulfillment, independent of whatever therapy it was giving them. Writing was its own good. writing became its own end, diba? And I think any beginning writer who wants to do serious writing will have to see in the end that writing is its own reward. Writing is its own summum bonum, its own highest good. Okay. All right. Okay. I think we can
I
end
have
there,
an
unless you have
advice.
something else to
Sir,
say.
advice I have.
Oh, Steno.
My advice to young writers would be to put yourself out there, put your works out there. Kasi I know so many queer, gay, lesbian writers na magagaling, na maraming nagsusulat ng novel, poetry, pero hindi nila nilalabas, hindi nila sinasali sa workshop, hindi nila pinopost sa blog or sa Wattpad. Napakadaming avenues to showcase their work, pero natatakot sila. So I guess the advice that I could give them is to sort of come out and put your works out there. Just kasi
Well,
ang
Steno,
daming mahuhusay talaga na hindi
easier said
nabibigyan ng
than done,
exposure.
no? That's the hardest thing to confront. If you are a queer writer,
True.
we're actually telling you to come out, and not everyone has that ability or that the circumstances that we have, no, that we have had, so that we could come out. Many of them are still living in very conservative homes, no, with very conservative parents.
Who write blogs and they use pen names. So if they can do that, they just put their works out there and share it to other people, other LGBTQ people na makakabasa nun. Kasi ang dami namang avenue today na you don't necessarily have to expose yourself. So yun lang.
Okay, Charlie, probably.
Pwede ako may pahabol na
Naro, sorry, Naro.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yes, okay lang may pahabol ako na. So yung my advice is in relation to what Charlie said earlier. In that for any writer, I guess my first advice, or perhaps my only advice, is as people who love words, to love your name, to fall in love with your name. And if you don't fall in love with your name, give yourself a name and baptize it as yours. And ito yung earlier kasi na-discuss natin on names. And for me, one of my realizations is that before I was presenting myself as Mariel Alonzo in our workshops and even in perhaps in publications or when I talk to other people. And I find it very uncomfortable to have to clarify that I am non-binary, to have to use terms that are not even natural to me personally, or even to sa Davao. I don't think there's any way to call ourselves non-binary. So yun yung palaging ginagamit. So what I use is that I gave myself my own name. So Naro is a name that I gave to myself. And first, I really felt the difference within my family. That suddenly the family became queer. To realize that why are you naming yourself ang haba-haba na ng pangalan mo, Mariel Ana Rose Nicole Lopez Alonzo, pero Naro ang tawag sa'yo. And then I realized that, yeah, this is really queer. Me giving myself a name, not even calling myself non-binary anymore. And even in my writing, it changed. So the moment that I baptized myself as Naro, it became a sort of a prophecy. And it changed how I look at writing and how I write day to day. So that's my advice.
You know, Naro, when I teach, that's the first thing I do when we introduce ourselves during the first meeting. I ask my students, give me the name you want me to call you for the SEM, and that will be your name in my class. It doesn't have to be the name you have. It could be the name you've always wanted to have. So I have gotten very weird names now and then. Students would really give themselves wonderful names, and see, we were not consulted about the name they would give us, diba? Our parents, diba? And then we would end up growing up into people who cannot identify with the name they gave us, right? And so it's a wonderful idea that we can still name ourselves. Yes. And if you are a writer, yung medyo it connects with Steno's work, no? Use a byline that's your own name, the name you like. It doesn't have to be the name you actually got given by your parents. It might be a good strategic decision to do that if you are still closeted or selectively out only. Charlie and Macky, who are both on Panay Island, Miss Miss Aklan and Miss Antique. Macky, any bit of advice you can give our queer listener who wants to write?
I think for me, one of the best advice that I got is to write about the locality. It's really just me because I've really internalized what I learned from the LGBT workshop. That well, Sir Neil, you encouraged me to really explore what we have here in Panay because I I I knew what we have here in terms of culture and tradition, in terms of literature, but I was not really exploring all of them. I was not utilizing them in my materials. But now that I was able to realize how rich and diverse the culture and tradition of Panay is in terms of literature, then I have a lot of imagery and a lot of representations that I can pull out of these traditions and culture that I can use in my writing. So for young writers out there, especially in rural areas, you can really write about your locality because there's a lot of imageries, there's a lot of narratives that are left undiscovered that you can write and just put a twist on it, and it will be a great material. And then another advice that I got is to really choose wisely on your on who you look up to, I think, or who you ask advice from in terms of your mentors, because I've experienced that in terms of the literary circle here in my locality, that not everyone or not all writers here uh, are in speaking terms, if I can say that, with each other. So I think with the division of writers here in my locality, I realized also that I have to choose which, not really like it's a political thing, but I have to choose, or I was lucky enough to be on the side which I was really able to grow. Uh, that's something like that. I don't know if I can discuss further, but that's just it. Just be wise
Picture,
on your
yeah.
mentorship.
Yes. Be selective in a way and be very wise in choosing the mentor.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Charlie.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is really hard for me to do because I don't pretty much believe in authorities. Like sometimes I believe in them, but for the most part, I don't really take them seriously. And so I don't want
So
to consider.
maybe cast yourself in the role of not an authority, but simply a companion, a fellow writer, a fellow person. So what, like a friend, if you have a friend who wants to write, what advice might you give that person?
So maybe in place of an advice, what I can give is an experience. And I think for many gay people, becoming a gay person is really hard. And I think it's the same for the art that we produce. It's a hard art to produce, and so you need to be willing to fight for it, to fight for your art. In my case, for instance, in the case of this book, I needed to fight for it to come out. So be ready to fight for your art if you believe in it. So courage, I think, and believe in your own experience.
Yeah. Then fight for your art. And you will understand that it might be difficult in the beginning, but it will become easier as you keep doing it. No? Because you will, in fact, whether we like it or not, you will find readers and you will find support systems and you will find colleagues and companions and mentors and things like that. No? They will all happen, but you have to make that first step and you have to be courageous in doing that. So the bit of advice really is to just keep at it. No, if you are starting to write already, then keep writing. But make sure you are reading so that you understand, you have a context of what you're doing. Because you're not doing it, you're not the first person to do it, right? There is a world already that pre-exists more or less your own work. and you have to be familiar with that world. Okay.
And to say that I'd like to thank you, Neil, personally, for believing in the work that we do as gay people, as queer folk. Yeah.
Of course, that's my pleasure and my honor to be at the helm of the press just when all these wonderful manuscripts are being produced and submitted. And it's such a wonderful pleasure and an honor that you have chosen the UP Press, not as your to publish these works. And as long as I'm the director of the press,